So this is my pieces of fabric that I'm getting ready to make an autumn landscape with. If you watched my video last week, I basically cut strips out and was laying them down and playing around with the colours and seeing what I liked. The important thing about just playing with your fabrics is you start to get a sort of a conversation going between you and your pieces of material. And the more you play it around, it's very interesting how when you just move things around, how the colours start to sing with each other. So depending on what you put next to each other as to what effect you get. And as I said, I think last time, you know, there's 1001 different ways you could be doing this. And the more you play with it, the more fun you can have. But what I've come up with is, I've decided not to use this piece. I decided that was a bit busy because I want to include some seed heads. And I thought for this one, that was just a little bit busy. And in fact it's very funny because I had thought I'd decided on my fabrics, but when I lay it out again like this, again I'm thinking, oh well, maybe I should do it with this, or maybe I should do it with that. I added a piece of tweed into the mix as well, which I thought was rather nice. This was an old skirt of my mum's that she had for many years, and it was a lovely piece of tweed. It's got lots of greens and browns and purples in. I don't know what kind of tweed it is. I think it might be, I don't know if it's anything special or not, but I love it, and I've still got plenty of it left, which is really nice. But the first thing I was going to show you actually was, this is one of my sort of inspirations. This is a guy called David Humphreys who paints these beautiful pictures. He works in Pembrokeshire and he works in the Hebrides, and I absolutely love going out to the Hebrides. The Scottish Islands are just a must on my go-to list for summer holidays, far from the madding crowd. But anyway, what I really love about them is they're very, very simple. I love the dark colours. He's got all these beautiful dark colours going on, and then he's got light colours doing the lines across the landscape on this painting, and I just really love that. It's rather different to what you would normally think to do, I feel. So that's kind of an inspiration. It's always in the back of my head, this one, when I'm making a landscape, and it's very inspiring. So I think what I'd come up with actually was, if I just take these off again, I think my final design, if I don't change my mind again, was something like this, if I can just remember how I had it. I think I had that kind of up there, and I had some dark brown in the middle, and then I had this sort of paler tan sort of colour going up at the top. And what I'm going to do, my intention is that I'm going to add some tall seed heads into here, which I have to decide on those as well. That's part of my composition and my design. It's got this nice long linear sort of feel to it. I've only got 5 pieces because, as I said to you last week, if you watched my video last week, I really wanted this to be very, very simple. And the other thing was, when I started playing around with possible seed heads, which I was doing excuse me, yesterday, and I was trialing them. This is what I always recommend that you do, is you make little samples of what you think you might like to include in something like seed heads or flowers, or how you think it's going to look and what colour threads to use. And I thought, actually, when I started playing around with these, that I thought this was a little bit dark, this brown. It's very dominant in the middle and would probably be better kind of down there, maybe, as a bit better balance to it. But actually I really like that, so I think that brown is going to go. I really like the texture of this piece down here. It's got a lovely sort of bobbly effect, quite textured, which I like, and I just thought actually that's a little bit different in the middle there, or maybe I'll put it that way round. No, you see, again, if you put that next to that, that goes very dark, and I'm not sure that that's what I want. I mean, you could play around with this for ages. The beautiful thing is that if, unlike using paints, I guess, if you're using paints, so I don't think you can see that one at the top there, can you? That's what I've got at the top. I'll put it there and then you can sort of see it. If you're using paints, you know, this could take ages, but because you're using materials and their colour is instant, and the effect of putting them next to each other is like instant, you can see straight away what you might or might not want to use. So anyway, I need to make a final decision about this. So I think this is what I thought yesterday I liked. I'm going to just have these like this. I'm going to try and butt them up against each other. Now, if you've got an embellishing machine, you could very much be putting these down onto the calico I've got behind here. If you've got like a piece of old blanket or something to put them onto, that would be great as well, because that'll make it really thick. Because I'm using calico, I think I'll probably have to use some stitch and tear when I come to actually stitch it. So I'm just going to simply, I'm going to pin these very roughly in place, because when I stitch them they may well move, and I really want to try and make sure they butt up against each other. Because they're quite thick fabrics, because they're wool, and felted wool at that, some of them, I don't want them to be on top of each other, I don't think, because I think that's too much. Yeah, so I'm just going to pin these on roughly, take it over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to do some stitching. But the other thing I was going to sort of talk about was, I mean, obviously I've got some really nice threads here, nice colours to put onto making some lines across the landscape. I haven't quite decided what I'm going to do. I did do some little drawings just to try whether I wanted to have things coming up or whether I want things going across, and I think because I'm going to have seed heads going up over, I think I'm going to make my lines horizontal. I did play around actually with putting some, where's my other little bit gone? I had several bits of this. This is really nice. If you cut this wool fabric, you can make some quite nice sort of linear bits going across like that, so you could start to make furrows and ridges as though it's been ploughed or something. But the other thing you could be doing, you could actually be doing it the other way. You could be doing it vertically. So you could play around with that. You could play around with yarns. Oops, that's not supposed to be there, excuse me. You know, you could be playing around with yarns. You could put yarns down going across in different colours. I even got a turquoisey colour out, because sometimes using something really what looks quite wacky can really lift a piece. So you could be adding some turquoise into the mix, because especially turquoise and orange are really, they're kind of, I think they're opposite on the colour wheel. They certainly go quite nicely together. But again, because I'm going to do seed heads on it, I really want the background just to be quite quiet and simple, and then the seed heads can sing. The final thing I was going to say was, sometimes using really thick threads like this can be nice, so that kind of starts to bring in a bit of a feeling of what he's got going on here, using these very simple lines. But it's a question of whether you can actually get a needle that these will go through. I think these are probably hand stitching threads. Sometimes I put threads like this in the base of my machine, into the underneath, into the bobbin underneath, which in fact I'll just show you something if you just bear with. Yeah, so I can put these thick threads, I can wind them around a bobbin just as you would do for normal sewing, but they're quite thick, and the only thing is, if you put them in your bottom bobbin, you have to stitch from underneath, so you'd have to be stitching from that side down, so you don't really have any control over what happens to the threads on the top, which can be quite good fun. I quite like doing that sometimes. But what I do is I have a separate bobbin. If I'm going to do this, my bobbin holder is a spare bobbin holder that I only keep for doing thick threads, because I alter the tension on it, on the little wheelie bit thing here. It's like a screw, isn't it? I alter the tension on that. This is a trick I learnt in college, so I shall share it with you. They had what they called black case bobbin holders, and they were designed only for using thicker threads, and you were allowed to alter the tension on them, but you weren't allowed to alter the tension on the main bobbin on your machine that you were using. And I've kept that rule for myself. So this is a spare bobbin holder that I purchased, and that means if I want to do thicker threads in the base, I can. I don't do it very often, but you know, it can be quite effective. It's rather nice sometimes to do that if you just want to have a play around, and as I say, you don't have so much control over it. What I suppose you could do also, possibly, is things like this. If you've got a really narrow zigzag on your machine, you could be lying these across here and actually zigzagging them down quite simply, if you wanted to try that. I mean, if you were very clever, I guess you could. No, I don't think so. You could stitch it with a single thread across a straight stitch, but I think that would be very dodgy. Or of course you could hand stitch, you know, there's nothing to stop you actually doing some hand stitching with some nice thick threads. But you know me, I'm a machine girl mostly. I'm not really, I a hand stitcher very often. Occasionally I do some. So I'm going to, anyway, that's enough chatting. I'm going to go and get some stitching done. Okay, so who said there is no plan B? I have a plan B here, because what I've had to do, as I've realised, I needed to put my stitch and tear underneath. Now, if you don't know this stuff, it's a stabiliser, which means it's going to hold everything in place. It's stiff enough to hold your fabrics, because these are quite floppy on their own, and your machine will just eat them if you try and embroidery into them. So I put stitch and tear behind. I've pinned it with a few more pins, and I've actually taken all the other fabrics off because they were waggling around, I'll be honest with you. It wasn't very helpful. So now what I need to do is, I've decided I've put in the top. I found some other threads that I've got actually, and they're a little bit thicker, but they're not as thick as the other ones I was showing you. This is, I would say this is a machine stitching thicker thread. This one is, it's a Coats, trying to show you there, it's a Coats Duet. It says brilliant performance, 100% polyester, made in the EU. And so I'm going to try that. I've put that in my top, just as normal, on my top of my machine, and I'm going to stitch it. I'm going to do lines going up and down, because although this is very bobbly, and I thought I could do it in circles, but I quite fancy making it look like ploughed. So I'm just going to start here. I'm starting in the middle just because it seems easiest. No rhyme or reason really, and I'm just going to come down and along and then go back up. And try and make them go in straight lines. Not always the easiest thing in the world. So I'm going to go along to the other end and finish that off, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do with the next colour piece. Okay, so we've now got the second piece. I've actually stitched it down this edge. I think you can just see it. I'm using just a normal thin thread in a nice, this is quite a nice sort of autumnal shade. I don't know if you can see that under the light. Try and show you it. It's quite tricky this morning. The light's a bit dodgy. The grey, it's quite grey outside, although it's brightened up a bit. When I first came in to do my filming, it was really dark, and I was thinking, oh dear. But actually, it's brightened up a bit, which is great. But it's always a bit funny under the light of my sewing machine. So all I'm doing here is I'm doing horizontal lines going across. Very simple. You don't even need to do free machine embroidery for this, really, but it's just much easier. Because you can just go back over, turn it round much easier. And I don't mind if it's a bit wobbly. As I always say, I'm just celebrating the wobble, because the lines on the land, they're not all flat and straight and measured. Because this is really nice thick fabric, because it's got the wool, you can see, I think there we're starting to create this impression of lines across the land, which I like. So very simple stitching, very simple fabric. So I'll just keep going on this, and I'll show you. I can just about go backwards, but actually it's easier if I turn it around, to be honest. Okay, so I'm pinning on this last piece here, this next piece I should say, this nice maroony sort of colour. And what I'm going to do is what I did with this one, which is I just chop roughly where I want it to go. I'm making sure that the edges are not all streamlined, because I don't really want them streamlined. I want them to feel free and edgy. Edgy's the word today. Edgy. I think my stitch and tear is going for a bit of a wander over that way, but it'll be okay. It's gone a little bit sideways. I might put another strip up there, but Not to worry. I don't worry about anything. I don't care how it turns out. It's going to be fun to do. That's the main thing. No stress. Just fun to do and see where it goes. I think we'll pin that way though. There we go. So I'm going to decide what I'm going to do for this one. I can't quite decide whether I'm doing it horizontal again. I could be doing big waggles on it. I'm just going to sit and ponder it for a moment and then I'll show you what I do. So I'm just going to look at what colour I'm going to put onto this nice maroon fabric, and I think I'd like to use, I think I'm going to use that one. It's a bit darker, so it will have a bit of contrast, but again I'm just going to do simple horizontal lines. I think, as I said before, I just want the background to be really the background, just very subtle and there, although there's quite a colour contrast going on there, but when I get the seed heads on I want the background just to sort of be there as a landscape background. So let's get that one onto my machine. Okay, so this is where I've got to. I've got them all stitched down, very carefully buttered the two pieces together, not overlapped but very, you know, closely buttered up so that they don't show anything from underneath, and it's beginning to look really nice. It feels lovely. It feels very autumnal and gorgeous. I have to say I'm really pleased with it. The simplicity and this lovely tactile quality of the woolly fabrics, it's just lovely. It's exactly what I needed today. As I say, it's a grey rainy day here in Cumbria, and this is just lovely. It makes me feel all warm and cozy and snug, and these lovely colours going on. So the last piece I've got here is the top bit. I did add a little bit of stitch and tear. I don't know if you can see that. I did add a little extra strip of stitch and... Shall I get my teeth in? I added a little extra strip of stitch and tear there. It just shows you that, you know, I've been doing this for years and years, and I call myself a professional, but here we go. I've got a bit that's missing there, so I'm just gonna fudge it together. This is why I love textiles. This is why I'm not a carpenter or something like that, because I can get away with things. You know, with stitching, you just add a bit more fabric on top or you fudge it behind. Nobody's going to be looking behind. It's fine. So I'm just going to use, I'm using the same colour thread for this bit as I used for this bit, so there's a bit of continuity. This one I just kind of waggled a little bit, which I'll try and show you when I pull the camera closer. But I'm just going to stitch this bit now. A little bit of wiggling, as though it's the landscape lines. Really, I'm trying to do that now. Right, so that's that all stitched down. It didn't take me very long. The longest bit was making my decisions about it, which I helped myself. I always say, if you don't know what to do, if you don't know how to stitch things, make a sample. Okay, and here I just thought I'd show you this. This is hilarious. That was my first bit. I forgot to put the presser foot down, didn't I? You see, look at that. Crazy stitching on the back of there. And if I turn this over, you'll see it's got the simplest of stitching going on, okay, which is what I wanted. This is a bit more kind of wobbly, as though you're moving up into the hills of the landscape. This is more like sort of ploughed fields down here, was what my thinking was. And I'm really pleased with that. You can see where the light is catching it. You can see how with some very simple stitching indeed, you start to create a texture on the surface. So it doesn't have to be fancy. You could do this not even with free machine embroidery, as I say, but the thing about free machine embroidery is it's just a little bit easier, I think, to do, and you don't get such stiff lines. I think this is quite nice because it does wobble a bit. It's got a bit of humanity to it. So that's all for now. That's all for this week. I'll say cheerio and thank you so much for watching. It's really lovely to have your company in my studio on this beautiful autumn day. It's brightening up out there, so I might even get out for a walk later on. And next week we're going to have some fun doing some seed heads on here. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.